managing your stress during your career disruption, and we looked at strengths and skills and passions. Today, we're going to be exploring your personal brand, but there are other programs coming up in the series, so if you haven't had a chance to register for them, now is a great time to do that, well, after the program. I'm also delighted to welcome two of my very favorite colleagues and friends, Stephanie Fitzwater-Arduini and Sherry Levinsky-Raskin. Stephanie, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
And we're going to hear more from Stephanie in a couple of moments. And Sherry, thank you for joining us today.
Absolutely. Really thrilled to be here.
Yep, and I know that Sherry and Stephanie will add a lot to our conversation throughout the entire program. For those of you who joined us last week for our first two webinars, you might recall that we started off by exploring, in the midst of this global pandemic and major life disruption, that some of us had been on a pretty rosy path. And then all of a sudden things changed and people expressed variations of despair and confusion, lack of direction, periods of self-reflection, being lost, and certainly not knowing what the future holds. We also introduced a little bit of levity last week, exploring with some humor from a Gary Larson cartoon about something coming from out of left field. And this thing, as we all know, is the COVID-19, the global pandemic, which has disrupted all of our lives in every way possible. Those of you who joined us last week may also remember that Wendy Luke introduced us to the concept of VUCA, and Marcia Semmel continued the conversation exploring the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world we live in. Wendy Luke also introduced us and helped us understand that depending on where we are in our lives and our careers, we are all going through some stages of grief, whether it's shock, denial, or frustration or other. And just knowing that we are all in this together, even if we may be on different parts of that continuum, was helpful for us in our conversation last week. We also talked about how all of this really impacts our careers. Many of you in the audience may have been furloughed or recently laid off. Some of you may be just graduating from school and wondering what's next for your career. Some other folks may have already been in between jobs, or perhaps career changers, or starting out on their own, setting up their own consulting practice. Last week, we introduced a set of skills and competencies that we gleaned from a variety of sources with the intent of helping our audiences look at the patterns of skills and competencies needed in today's workforce. Things like critical thinking and problem solving, communication, teamwork and collaboration, flexibility and adaptability, data literacy and tech fluency, critical thinking and problem solving. All of these appeared across different organizations and informed our conversation last week, which will continue to inform our conversation this week. Marcia Semmel last week also explored some of the 6 skills for leaders at all levels, with the notion that regardless of where you are in your organization, or if you happen to be in between organizations, these are essential skills for leaders at all levels: strategic agility, getting personal or relationships, communication, data fluency, prototyping, and systems leadership. We also explored a quick down and dirty exercise of getting you to think more holistically about all the things you're good at and all the things you're passionate about, and using these starter lists as the first steps towards identifying your skills and competencies, and more of what we'll discover today with regards to your personal brand. So today's program is, of course, all about powering up your personal brand. We'll start off by exploring some of the elements of a brand and identifying some of the characteristics of a personal brand. and hopefully help you come away with some ways to explore and communicate your own personal brand. And I'll be providing some information, and I'm inviting my colleagues, Stephanie and Sherry, to join me throughout the program at whatever points, with some perspective and commentary from your own career paths. So before we jump into our content, we'd love to get you started in the chat box and find out what you think a brand is. Not a personal brand, but when you think of a brand, what is that? So just take a moment to type into the chat box your impression of brand. And Stephanie and Sherry, let's take a look and see what comes into the chat box, and in a moment we can comment on that. Identity, a reputation, a quantifiable identity. Catherine says, what makes something unique and what comes to mind when you think of something? How something is effectively marketed, a visual and marketing identity, identifying factor. What comes to mind when someone thinks about you? Commercially homogenized products. Yeah. Self-expression, how you're perceived.
Yeah, Greg, this is Stephanie. I see some level of emotion in here too. So if it's personality or self-expression, something more than just a look, but also a feel.
Thank you for calling that out, Stephanie. We're definitely going to talk about that aspect of branding and marketing in just a couple of moments. This is great. Thank you all. And if you want to continue typing anything into the chat box throughout the program, please feel free to do so. So as some of you already identified, a brand in the commercial sense is what businesses tell their customers, what they have to offer, what they're selling, the product, the service, the identity. It also serves as a familiar bridge between the manufacturer or the seller and the consumer or the buyer. And in fact, it is a relationship. So on this slide, I have a picture of Starbucks. I think nearly every one of us knows what a Starbucks is and what a Starbucks has to offer. I think we can all agree that regardless of where you are in the country, in the world, you can go into a Starbucks and get your mocha venti latte, and you can be pretty sure it's going to be the same wherever you happen to go. And generally speaking, a Starbucks might look the same all around the world. Current circumstances notwithstanding, I don't imagine Starbucks are very populated right now, but generally speaking, we understand what a brand is. And because it's familiar, it's something that we go back to. And whether we actually realize it or not, commercial brands rely on that relationship, rely on that familiarity, so that you will come back again. One of my favorite brands personally is Target. I love Target stores. I love them because they're convenient. I can go to Target and pretty much get anything I want to, from housewares to khakis to groceries. Stephanie, Sherry, do you all have a personal brand that you like?
Well, you already took Target.
What about you, Sherry? What do you think? What's a brand favorite of yours?
So that's a great question, Greg. I'm kind of thinking that I'm thinking about mail, like Gmail or Yahoo, or kind of these ways of communicating, and those brands, those kind of images that come to mind.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Yeah, I think, for example, I love Facebook not so much Twitter, but other folks really like Twitter or Instagram. So those are all brands.
Mm-hmm.
Target, as I mentioned, is a very popular brand. And part of what makes it popular is that it's easily recognizable. You know that bullseye when you see it, and you know that that's a Target store. You know that red color is associated with Target. One of my favorite brands, personally, is the Washington Nationals. I happen to be a Washington Nationals fan. I'm guessing there are plenty of others who have sports teams that they are affiliated with. And if you think about what draws us to sports teams, if you think about it, it is something familiar. It's what we know, it's what we like. We have particular players that we like. We buy season tickets or not. We go with our friends. We value it enough to make that journey to a ballpark or to watch it on TV with our friends. And there is an emotional connection. I should also mention that our Washington Nationals are World Series champs this year, in case anybody didn't know that. That's right, Catherine, you got it. Not, yeah, the Nats are great, and I'm hoping there's a couple of Nats fans in the audience today. But the Washington Nationals, like all baseball teams and sports teams, have a brand associated with them. And the people who are in charge of these brands are tapping into that emotional connection. So Stephanie, you mentioned that earlier, that there is a real connection on a personal level, even though I may not think of having a personal relationship with the Washington Nationals. There is a bit of that emotional touchstone. Thanks, Joanna, for bringing that as well. So I want to pause for a moment and do a very brief introduction to some basic marketing principles, the 5 Ps of brand marketing. And here they are on the screen in front of you: product, promotion, price, people, and place. And I introduce these to you just to contextualize our conversation about marketing and branding. But we're going to come back to these very same principles when we get into our conversation about personal branding. So if you think about the 5 Ps of brand marketing, the product is the thing, the goods, the service, the item, or the ideas used to satisfy customer needs and wants. The promotion is how those goods, those items or services are communicated to the consumer. And that might be in a variety of ways: social media, website, print campaigns, brochures, signage, sandwich boards out in front of a shop. Lots of ways that manufacturers or sellers promote their goods and services. Then there's the price, the cost or exchange process between the customer and the seller. So if you think about whatever you end up buying, so for example, Stephanie, you and I go to Target. Target's reasonably priced. I know that it's a good value and, generally speaking, quality products, all wrapped around price. If you think about people is really a two-way street in this context. Not only is it the manufacturer or the seller, but it's also the target market, the consumers who are in taking part of the exchange of products and services. And then the last P in this list is place, the multiple channels or locations where the product is sold. So that's kind of closely related to promotion. In this case, promotion is actually more about the campaign that might be engaged, the kind of language and images that are used in the various places or channels where products are sold. So I want to hold on to that idea for a moment because we are going to revisit it a little bit later. But for now, let's go ahead and in the chat box And some of you already got at this, but let's talk about personal brand. So we've described brand in the commercial sense, but now let's get a little more nuanced and talk about personal brand. So take a moment and reflect on personal brand, and let's see what you come up with.
Greg, I'm seeing more of this idea of being unique, similar to how we were talking about with a commercial brand. What you bring to the table.
Mm-hmm. How are you different from others? The image you want to present, you want people to think of when they think of you. What you bring to an organization, absolutely. How you present yourself. Somehow me is different from all others. Yeah, the impression that you want to give to the world. A collection of traits, personal history, your strengths, values, what you can do that others can't, that distinctiveness. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Mm-hmm. Your sense of style, how you carry yourself, your clothing, how people experience you, reputation. Tito, thank you. Purple Cow. Yes. Purple Cow is my brand of my service. I'm glad you mentioned that, Tito. And some of you in the audience who know me know where the Purple Cow came from. It actually has a personal connection. The Purple Cow is part of a set of ceramic purple cows that my mom bought her mom back in 1945 when she was a teletype operator on the Santa Fe Railroad. So I've had those Purple Cows in my possession for a long, long time, and they remind me of a very unique, special person, my mom. And so when I decided to set up Purple Cow, that became the name.
And Greg, I was just going to mention that Marta said something interesting that I was thinking about when it comes from corporate branding or commercial branding as well as personal branding, is that idea of values. So not just your experiences and your personality, but values, since that's something that sometimes draws me toward a corporate brand more than others.
Absolutely. And I definitely think, Stephanie, you and I will talk about this in a little bit, but personal values and organizational values, we're going to talk about how that plays out on the job and where there might be a value fit.
Especially as museums are becoming institutions centered around values also.
And Greg, I was also going to mention that, you know, personal brand as well as brand is thinking about what people will say about you when you're not there, how they'll describe you to someone else. And I think that's really important to also consider that could be, you know, brand is not necessarily a positive or a negative. It is what it is. And so being able to identify and really think about how others see you as well as how you see yourself.
No, that's great. In fact, Sherry, when we were working on this program, I recall that you mentioned that to me, the idea of what people say about you when you're not there. Can you remind me where that came from?
Absolutely. So Jeff Bezos, Amazon CEO, actually that was said, your personal brand is things that people say when you're not in the room. And I think that was just, that's just resonated with me. And the fact that, you know, as I said, it doesn't have to be, brand is not innately positive or negative. So you actually have the power to determine which direction that's taking. What are people saying about you when you're not there?
Right. But you can certainly control how people perceive you. That influences what they say about you when you're not there, right?
Exactly.
And James, I love that you put in ethics because ethical behavior in the broadest sense is part of everything that we do in our lives and certainly in our workplaces, whether we work in a museum or some other kind of organization. But ethics is a big issue from the top down and all the way across any organization. And Krista, I like that you mentioned 360 because we're going to talk about 360 assessment in a handful of minutes. So keep the chat conversation going, and I'm going to move along here. And Stephanie and Sherry, again, at any point you want to chime in and open up your videos, you're welcome to do that. But here's a definition I found of personal brand that actually goes along with, Sherry, what you shared from Jeff Bezos. And that is, your personal brand is who you are and what you believe, visibly expressed by what you do and how you do it. So Sherry, if we put this quote side by side with your Jeff Bezos quote, you know, what people say about you when you're not there, they really go hand in hand, I think.
Yes, absolutely. And what actually resonates even more so with the quote that you have up right now is that recognizing a brand, you should be able to express the why you're doing it, the how, and the what. So there should be able to, the how, the who, I mean, the why, the how, the what really in itself should be something that people are remembering, recognizing.
Absolutely. Why, how, you know, it's really what we learned in 5th grade. You know, why, how, what, who, where, all of those come into play here. Thank you.
And if I could also just say, just in the way I'm thinking about those 3 sections, is that you are articulating kind of your passion and what you're all about. And then the uniqueness of what you bring to the table that, you know, Stephanie, for instance, may have the similar passion, but her how may be different than my how. As well as on the what is my skills or quality or expertise that I bring to the table, which again, the passion may be very similar from person to person or from company to company, but it's the how and the what that kind of pulls it back out, that gives it that much more uniqueness and hopefully positive, being positively remembered.
Absolutely. And I love that you really focused on the how, because that's what this slide is all about, how you communicate, how you continue to learn about yourself, about the people around you, the organization you work in or would like to work in, how others perceive you. We've talked about that. We've definitely talked about that relationship between people and values. Stephanie, you brought that up earlier, and somebody mentioned that in the chat box. And how you continue to grow relationships. Those of you who were in the webinars last week will remember this image at the bottom of this slide. I pulled this from my website. This happens to be a collage of some of my favorite people in my life. And not just there for slide decoration, but because these people on this slide really represent about 20 years of my professional career. And Sherry, I see you smiling because you see that picture of you and Stephanie and I right in the middle there, which I love that picture. There's a lot of great smiles here, and not just because I'm a shameless selfie taker, but because these are really valuable relationships that I've had the fortune to build over time. And that's part of the reason why I've got Sherry and Stephanie here on this program. I should pause here for a moment and say that in some ways we are part of a posse. All 3 of us come from graduated from the museum education program at the George Washington University. And I happen to know that Lottie Lent is in the audience, so go MEP. Even though we didn't go through the program at the same time, the same years, our paths have crossed in different ways over time. Sherry, you and I have known each other for, it seems like forever. And we've continued to collaborate and do work together, as well as growing into really great mentors and friends. And Stephanie, you were my intern when I was the director of professional development at the American Alliance of Museums. And that's really how we crossed paths. And here we are, still connected.
And look at that, Greg. We also have a current MEPer attending as well.
Great. I love it. Thanks, Ariel and Catherine. MEP for the win. Wow, there's a bunch. Colonials rule. Awesome. Okay, so there we go. Building relationships, even in the chat box. Some of what we've been talking about already has been more succinctly defined by Daniel Goleman in his work on emotional intelligence. So some of you may be familiar with this. Marcia Summel introduced this a little bit last week. But the general premise behind emotional intelligence is both self and social awareness. So awareness of yourself, your awareness of your emotions and how you communicate with others, your self-confidence, your self-control. And then on the other side of this matrix is your social awareness, your empathy, your awareness of your environment within an organization, for example, and your influence with regards to social skills and how you develop yourself as an inspirational leader, recalling that leaders can be at all levels, not just the head of the organization. How you go about helping to develop others in their own work habits and skills, and how you build bonds and the ways in which you work on teams. Sherry, Stephanie, I don't know anybody in our field who doesn't work on teams or some kind of project group on a pretty regular basis, even virtually. So last week we talked a little bit about this, the quick starter list of what you're good at and what you're passionate about. And I reintroduce it here because this is a really great place to start, a really simple place to start thinking about your personal brand. This is where you get to be more self-aware in knowing yourself. So for those of you who were joining us last week, you might recall this, and maybe you actually did more than your starter list of things you're good at and passionate about. But for those of you who are new to today's webinar, this might be a great opportunity for you to scribble down on your notepad just any of those things that you're good at, maybe work-related or not, and also the things that you're passionate about. So Sherry, I know that there are particular things that you are really good at and passionate about in your personal life and professional life. I wonder if you might share some of those for a moment.
Sure, and I'm so curious what you think they are. But you know, along these lines, before I jump into that, I actually went through a process similar to this, where I was asking myself a lot about what I enjoy the most about jobs I've had, how I thought about my working style, kind of thinking about what attracts me or even repels me in certain ways from experiences. So I took some time and I thought about where my personal and my professional intersected, as well as where they kind of stood out and were really very separate. And it's similar to what you're talking about right now. And I realized that there were a lot of cross sections of areas that really resonate for me. Number one, I would say, and not necessarily in any particular order, is accessibility and access. And that's from a number of standpoints. That's in terms of content. That's in terms of physical access. That's in terms of different learning styles. And so that's kind of across the board in understanding audiences. And I actually think back to the fact that I have a cultural anthropology background, which, you know, when I got that, yes, my dad thought, what are you going to possibly do with that? And it was actually part of the, you know, it really resonated for me because it helped me think about what people do, why people do it, who people are, the skills, the experiences, kind of the social aspect of things. So I'm really always very curious about that. And I think that is really, I know that is really what has driven me towards audience research and evaluation and audience awareness, and then how all the components come together in the work that I do with museums. I also think in particular, what really comes out in terms of a working style, just to kind of shift gears, very organized and also a connector. I like connecting people. I like kind of thinking back to what you said about collaborating. I like thinking about and identifying and matching colleagues with one another for the betterment of whatever the project is. I think that the more voices you have, the more cultural competencies you have in the room, the better, regardless of how and what you are approaching. So I think those are two things I was just gonna, yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that that sense of collaboration and bringing ideas and people together to make something happen is something that you and I have in common. Probably part of the reason why we became colleagues and then have stayed friends for all these years, because we share that value system, right? I also appreciate the fact that you were the one who introduced me to some of the nuances of accessible practice in cultural institutions. Not that I wasn't aware of it, but you really helped me build my awareness and take action and be an advocate for accessibility. And I also should mention that you're also good at and passionate about wine, and so am I.
Yes, I am.
That is true.
I appreciate the thumbs up.
Stephanie, what would you say are the things that you're good at and passionate about?
I think one thing that our conversations about this program have been making me think about have been when I first started in museums, I just loved teaching about history. I got really excited about that and liked that idea better than classroom formal education. But as my career progressed, I realized that this was a field that was able to unite some of my different passions and things that I was good at. Because another thing that I was really passionate about, especially in college, was figuring out how to make the world a better place, like you do when you're in college, you know, so that's great. But I did a lot of community organizing there. So what I've been able to do in my last few positions and my last few institutions have been to figure out ways to build communities within my organization, but outside the organization, and help to connect our content to what's going on right now, and try to help people build connections, but then feel empowered to act on those. So it's been exciting as a transformation in terms of those were things I was good at and interested in, and then finding ways that I was actually able to connect those. And that's helped me evaluate career choices that I've made. Maybe it's not the content that I expected, but if I'm looking for signs in postings or in interviews about next steps in my career, knowing that that's something that's really important to me has helped me make those decisions.
Thanks. And like Sherry, I think one of the things that you and I have in common is that curiosity about so many different parts of the world, and wanting to connect people, make connections, foster connections. And I think even in college, but now we still want to make the world a better place. Mm-hmm. I think that is a key driver of what we do. So Sherry and Stephanie, thanks so much for weighing in. And here we are again, the three of us, relationships with each other. I think really we've just illustrated, just in our brief conversation, about our shared values and how we perceive each other. And really over the time that we all have gotten to know each other, we've gotten to know what we're good at and what we're passionate about, and tapping into those attributes.
And Greg, if I could
Go
also
ahead.
just mention, it's worth saying, and I think James might have placed this into the comment box earlier or alluded to this as well, but you know, your last bullet here, continually adapting and growing, I think is a really important uh, point to be thinking about with your relationship with others, as well as in the work you do that focuses on the passions you have. Because, you know, I know for me, I didn't start, obviously, and none of us, I think anybody on this call has started, you know, in the same place where you are now. And so taking advantage and thinking about and recognizing those strengths along the way, and then also what drives you, right? So I know that there are certain things that I'm really good at, for instance, but I also know that I don't really enjoy them as much as I enjoy doing other things. So I think that that's also a really important piece for the puzzle, and something that James had mentioned is that, you know, sometimes you might be really good at it, but that's not what people recognize about you, right? Because there might be a different passion or a different uh, skill set that you have not necessarily prioritized as much as other people have about you, a quality that you bring to the table. And so that actually, in my current situation, has been really informative for me about reflecting on what I know I can do really well. And is that actually what I want to continue doing really well? You know, there's always the fallback ons, but also just, I think the adapting and the growing and building from the relationships you have with others, relying on them to also be honest with you about your growth and opportunities and where you could do more, and perhaps shift gears a little bit. So I just think that's also really important, just because no one is I would bet that nobody who's here with us today is in the same place they were when they started. And that's a great thing. That evolution, I think, is really
Absolutely.
incredible.
Well, as you're talking, I think about just 2.5 years ago when my position was eliminated at the American Alliance of Museums. And that's about the time I started Purple Cow Career and Talent Development, because I realize I'm really passionate about helping people in their careers. And I've been doing it in a lot of ways for a long time. So I'm really good at it. And it's something of need, which is exactly where this webinar series came from. Um, and I also know that just, I think yesterday you posted a really poignant post on LinkedIn. I wonder if you might share that with our colleagues.
Sure. It really did. I think also thinking about this presentation really got my wheels spinning and my excitement to put the post out there. But for those who don't know, I was furloughed, as many of you may also have been during this time. And after 15 years of being at the same institution, although having many different jobs and responsibilities and roles, which has been extraordinarily exciting and opportunities for me to grow. But I would say that, you know, that was really quite devastating for me. And I realized that I let my institution and the work I was doing there really define how I define myself, right? And I realized that that was so inaccurate. And what my work was and is a reflection of what I'm really good at. And it's just much bigger than where you work. And I decided, you know, March 27th was the last day before my furlough. And I have to be honest that I I was very sad at the beginning and kind of lost myself, right? But then I just picked myself up and realized, you know what, I need to think about this. I need to reflect on what it is that I want to be doing. And I had always wanted to have my own consulting company, and knew that I could really put myself out there in a lot of different ways. But I spent the time at this moment to really think about what I bring, what my value add is among so many people who have incredible value adds. You know, what can I do? What does Sherry bring that others don't? Or what do I bring that could complement what others do? So I spent a lot of time thinking about that and feel really good now about where I am and confident and proud of myself. So, that was part of my post, was really putting it out there that I started this and I went through this process, and the response has been incredible, including some people saying that they've been in the same position and that it was helpful to read what I wrote.
Yeah, I found it really powerful. So thank you so much for sharing it. And what you're saying, Sherry and Stephanie, what we've been talking about a little bit, this is really about emotions and personal drive and ambition, and what we know about ourselves, what other people know about us and like about us, remember and value. Sherry, you have a great reputation in the field, so I can't imagine your consulting practice not being a success. But you've also spent a lot of time building really strong relationships and emotional connections with people, in addition to the strengths you bring in terms of your expertise with audience research and project evaluation and strategic initiatives. So kudos to you for doing that. So here's an exercise, a little bit like what Sherry was just talking about. And obviously we don't have time for you to do this full exercise here, but what I would like to encourage you all to do, and what I work on with my clients, my coaching clients, is getting folks to really think deeply about all the things they're good at, and thinking deeply about the things they're passionate about, and then looking at those patterns. Sherry, I think you talked about seeing connectivity across your personal interests and your professional interests, and tying those together and then turning those into what I call pillars. So what that looks like is, for example, let's say you just scribble down some things that you're good at and passionate about, and then you start thinking a little more holistically and intentionally about it. And you start turning that into a real list of things that you're passionate about, a real list of things that you're good at. And then you turn that into, again, what I call pillars. This happens to be a set of pillars from one of my clients. And this is the result of my client working through the list of things that they are good at, things that they're passionate about, and then percolating these up into these broader set of themes or pillars. Things like trust is a key pillar for this person. The power of teams is a key driver. The focus on results, the focus on making a difference in the world, the focus on or an expert at uncertainty and ambiguity and getting buy-in across different stakeholders. So I introduced this just as not these particular words or these particular pillars, but these are just an example. As Sherry, you pointed out, and you may have gone through an exercise not unlike this, in thinking about your own consulting practice. And I should point out that you started working on your consulting practice, gosh, a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago?
Yeah, November 2018.
Okay, so a while ago. So this situation that has landed on you was really just the catalyst for you to think more deeply and holistically, and these pillars are a way to help do that. Another way of thinking about personal brand characteristics is three particular categories: demonstrating the ways in which you're distinctive, relevant, and consistent. And the ways you are distinctive, this is how you communicate what you believe in and what you are committed to doing in your professional life. It's also about understanding the needs of others and wanting to meet those needs consistently. Relevance is delivering on the needs or wants of the institution or field, and the skills and competency expectations that come with that and what you bring to the table, and understanding what people know, like, remember, and value. Recall that we talked about that emotional connection. And then consistency is really dependability of behavior and how you go about building trust with others in a workplace from being trustworthy. People trust you because they know that you will deliver on time or whatever the criteria is. And as Sherry pointed out, that each interaction builds history and relationship strength. So Stephanie, I wonder if you have any thoughts when you think about your role as the Director of Education, Collections, and Exhibitions at the American Civil War Museum, and how you think about, from an organizational point of view, and the people who might work for you or with you, or the people you work for. Any thoughts about distinct, relevant, and consistent that you might share?
Sure. So I think if we were reviewing applicants for a job position, one thing that I've done is you've got to look at skills and qualifications, but I'm also thinking about how this person would fit in with the team. And it's something that Sherry said, how can somebody do the required tasks and do the jobs and do it well, but how also are they fitting in with this larger team of people? And how would that brand impact the balance of the team? Would it amplify some things and bring a new set of skills and perspectives we don't currently have represented? Would it overbalance one component of the team too much? At our organization, we have a lot of people who are very comfortable leading. At one point, there's some times where we worry, okay, we need somebody who can get out of the big picture and think about the details. We have somebody like that. But also for us, one thing that we're thinking about is we have a very different take on the content that we want to talk about when it comes to the American Civil War and its legacies. So there's a sense of, do folks get that? Do they get that content picture? Are they open to that and capable of doing that? But also, are they willing to take risks when it comes to practice? So we're looking for examples of how we can find the demonstrated values of some of this, even if it's not from a professional setting. Maybe it's from a part-time job or some volunteer work that they might be doing on the side. But we also look for just that fit and personality that we get from people in the room and what our capacity is as an institution. We had a position recently where we got fantastic candidates and wish we could have hired them all, but we knew that there was likely some change coming from that person's supervisor, so we needed somebody who could be more self-directed. And so that was another kind of X factor that we were thinking about when we were making decisions. So there's a little bit of what people bring, and then there's a little bit of the assessment of what does the team need and what does the institution need to achieve our large goals.
Absolutely. I want to just come back very quickly to a list of skills that I introduced earlier and last week. And in the context of some of the work that you do, Stephanie, in heading up your departments, multiple departments, I'm thinking about adaptability and flexibility, teamwork and collaboration that appear across these. And I find them interesting in the context of your role, because you started as the Director of Education, but now you wear three hats. So I wonder if you might talk about the need to be really quite adaptable and flexible and constantly learning and growing.
I wear at least three hats. I think one thing that I've found is, as I've grown, and Sherry, you and I were talking about this also, is this idea of what I got into this field to do and what I liked doing has changed and evolved. Some things I still love doing. I don't want to do them all the time. I don't do them every day. My interests have changed. I never thought I would want to be an executive director of a museum. And then I came to this idea of maybe, okay, fine, I feel obligated. And now I'd actually welcome considering an idea like that. My ideas of what I can do and what I bring have changed. But that's not what I went to grad school for. Sorry, Lottie. The idea of I went to grad school to learn deeply about informal learning and museum education. So I've had to pick these other skills on the side and had to be able to read where I could post, find opportunities, proactively be aware of what my weaknesses are and how I can complement those either through additional training or just surrounding myself with people who could fill in those gaps that I don't have.
Thanks, Stephanie. I want to, in the interest of time, I want to move on and just go through a couple of ways to perhaps help you think about self-discovery or self-reflection or building your self-awareness. It may be that you simply sit down and answer a few questions for yourself. Why do I do the work that I do? What do I act like during the most fulfilling times of my life? What fulfills me most at work? Sherry and Stephanie, you both talked about that. So maybe it's simply about answering some questions that get you thinking about yourself a little more holistically. Sometimes I work with my clients on a set of self-assessments, and some of you may have done some assessments of this sort. Some of you may have done a DISC assessment. Some of you have done a Myers-Briggs or a Keirsey temperament or a variety of other assessments that are available. One of the things I share with my clients and colleagues is that any one of these is only a snapshot. It's only one part of who you are, but it isn't the entire puzzle picture. So this might be something that if you happen to be furloughed or laid off and you've got some time, maybe this is something you might do, is to engage in some of these online assessments that are pretty readily available. I mentioned earlier the 5 Ps of brand marketing and suggested that here's where we're going to circle back around and see how these apply to us on an individual level or on a personal branding level. So if you think of yourself as the product, what you have to sell, the goods or the services or the ideas, that's who you are. That's your product. You are the product. The promotion is how you go about communicating that to others, and others might be in a job application or in a social setting or online. Price may not seem like it fits so much, but it definitely is tied with value and how we perceive ourselves, the value we bring to our own perception, but also how others value us. And I'm not necessarily talking about monetary value, but definitely the value system and that value relationship or value fit within organizations. Certainly the people we're talking about here is you as an individual with the product or service to offer, as well as the people with whom you come in contact. A supervisor, a coworker, a client, a consultant, a friend. And then the place where this happens, the channels, whether it's online or in an interview setting or on the job. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. One other way you might look at this is a handy little tool that I just recently rediscovered that I used to use in career workshops for quite a few years, and that is a self-report card identifying the 7 traits that managers find irresistible. So Stephanie, I'm thinking about what you were just talking about. And maybe for you all, just do a little quick reflection and on your notepad, what grade would you give yourself? You do what it takes to get the job done. You meet your commitments. You're brave. You challenge the status quo. You're an innovative problem solver. You have razor-like focus and you're low maintenance. I would hazard to say, Stephanie, these are all maybe characteristics you would be looking for in an employee.
Yeah, I think so. And it might vary the proportions by position and the composition of the team and the needs of the institution. If I've got a lot of detail-oriented people who one of their strengths might not be creativity, I might want somebody who brings more creativity. If I've got a lot of big picture, pie in the sky idealists like myself, I might need somebody who can complement and get the job done and have that razor-like focus.
And Greg, if I can add on to that from the other perspective, having gone through what I've just been doing as a furloughed employee and not sure kind of, where things are going to go, with thinking about the report card and the self-assessments, I strongly also urge and recommend that if folks haven't done that and you have the time to do it, I think it's really helpful. The other thing that I did in addition to reflecting on myself and my self-report card is also to do what we talked about earlier, similar to a 360 check, where I did something really quick and easy. It was through a program that I did. Actually, my colleague Krista, who is also here today, had recommended some General Assembly courses and things like that, which were great. And I attended one, and we did a 360 check where we had to text or email at least 6 people. It could be colleagues, friends, or family, and ask them in 3 words, how do they describe you? And then I went through that, and I've done that a couple times now, especially in this moment, and then took time to see what words repeated themselves, what descriptions were similar, how did they match with what I had identified in my report card, and then lastly, thinking to what Stephanie's talking about and what you might look for in a candidate and when you're applying for a job, how do those words and how does that all relate and translate into kind of your textbook job description wording, and so kind of where does that all fall? Right. So as you're talking about those examples, what are some of the descriptors that I came up with and that other people came up with that came together under any one of those?
Well, you mentioned a short and sweet version of a 360, and what I've got here on the screen is a free online 360 assessment that I've been using for a number of years, and the short version of it is you check off a variety of attributes and skills for yourself, and then you send the assessment out to your contact list, and they can provide anonymous feedback giving you that 360. So there's a variety of ways to do it, sort of short and sweet, something that might take a little more effort, but I think they're all important. We haven't really talked about this much, and I know we're down just to a couple of minutes left, but one of the things that I really encourage everybody to think about is this concept of elevator speech. And by that, I mean a way of identifying or talking about yourself, describing yourself in the context of what you know about yourself, but also what the field or the institution needs and what kind of solutions you can provide. Now, that elevator speech in whatever forms might appear in a variety of places. It might appear in your online profile, for example, your profile on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook. Each of those has an opportunity for you to post something in a profile or a bio. It also can come through how you post, what you post, the frequency of your posts, and the intent of your posts. All of that is part of your personal brand. It can also play out in how you're,
I was just going to say, if you're looking for work or if you're in a position to look for people to work for you, having active networks on those channels and making clear what some of that brand that you or those values that you have is really helpful in finding your next step or finding next candidates that come to you.
Absolutely, and you know this, that people will look at your profile. I can see who looks at my LinkedIn profile, which has gone up pretty dramatically since I launched this webinar series. So I know that people are looking. Now I got to make sure that what I'm communicating there is what I want people to know about me. Your brand will appear in your cover letter, your resume, your interviews. Again, this is how you talk about yourself, what you are good at, what you're passionate about, what you value, but also in connection with what you understand about the organization. And really, for those of you who are currently employed, on the job. And Stephanie, I see you nodding your head that this is the primary way many of us communicate our personal brands and our distinctiveness, our relevance, and our consistency.
Absolutely. And the relationships we build with each other as we're doing our work on the job can lead to next steps down the road. Plus, you can't put something on the resume unless you do it. So being able to do the work now is important.
Well said. Well said. So we want to get near the end of our program by encouraging you to take action. It's one thing to be aware of personal brand and another thing to start taking action. Take some time. If you happen to be furloughed or laid off or in between jobs right now, or even just this weekend, if you have a job, take some time to identify what you're good at and passionate about. Think about what a self-assessment might look like, either a jotted set of lists on a notepad or something a little more robust like an assessment. Or maybe you want to engage in that short and sweet Twitter assessment that Sherry described, or something more robust like the 360 assessment I introduced. If you were to craft an elevator speech for yourself, if you were to come up with a couple of sentences that could be something you talk about or something that you put in your profile on LinkedIn, what might that look like? I was just talking with a colleague yesterday who was working on her LinkedIn profile, and she said, you know, the great thing about LinkedIn is that it's not permanent, right? I can tweak it and change it as I go along, and I encourage you to do that. And I encourage you to keep communicating and engaging with colleagues and building lasting relationships. Or if for some reason you've got some colleagues who may have fallen off of your radar screen, now is a great time to reconnect with them. Not necessarily to ask for a job, but just to reconnect with them, like Stephanie, Sherry, and I have done. And you will recall, if anybody last week's programs, Wendy Luke introduced us to the concept of Kaizen. Basically making small steps can have big impact. So we encourage you not to think about the entirety of your personal brand, but maybe some small important step like that list or that assessment or that email to a colleague. And as we close out, think about what small step you might take to get towards your personal brand. I know we don't have time for open forum, but if you do have any comments or questions, please feel free to type them into the chat box. We'll stick around for a few more moments. And while we're doing that, I would love it if you would take a few moments to provide some feedback. I just opened a quick poll. Your feedback is important to us so that we can continue to improve the series as we go along.
And Greg,
And
while you're ending too, and you put that up, and I see some people are putting some information there in the chat box, I would just kind of offer 2 final suggestions too that we possibly didn't note before. And one thing that I've said to you in the past is I think it's really important when you're in this moment of transition and rethinking yourself is to take off your rose-colored glasses. And not, you know, that's not to say don't be optimistic and don't be excited, but that's more just to be, let's be realistic and recognize really what you bring or what you don't, and be very honest about that self-reflection time. And I'd also say that if you notice that there's areas of weakness that you wish were stronger, or a skill that you realize that you would really need as you're looking ahead at what you want to be doing, then go ahead and build those areas and look for outlets and look for colleagues or look for opportunities to develop those skills.
I would 100% that, Sherry, and also say encourage folks to think beyond the content area. A lot of time in museums, at least, we think a lot about the content focus that we're passionate about, but sometimes jumping content areas will give you skills and opportunities to grow those places where you want to go. If, for example, before coming back to history, I worked at a science museum, and being able to cross those genres gave me the opportunity to build out skill sets that were really important to me to move forward in the direction I wanted to go.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. I appreciate you being a part of this program. Of course, Stephanie and Sherry, a pleasure to have you here, but also an even greater pleasure to have you in my life. So thank you for that. And certainly thank you to my colleagues at the Mid-Atlantic Association of Museums and the Virginia Association of Museums for helping to make this program happen. And I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you to all of you for registering for the program and for showing up and for sharing some time on a Tuesday afternoon. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't already registered, our next program is on Thursday, May 14th, and I will be talking about networking with my colleague, Claudia Ocello, another great colleague in our shared circle. So please take a moment to register if you haven't done so. On behalf of all of us, I'm Greg Stevens. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you all.